At my daughter's wedding, I heard words that yanked the air straight out of my lungs. She leaned toward her wealthy mother-in-law, smiling like a magazine ad, and murmured, "She's a hopeless embarrassment. Nothing like you." The she was me. So when people rose with champagne flutes for the toasts, I stood too, and played an audio message her father recorded before he died. The hall went still. The string quartet froze mid-bow, and you could hear the refrigeration hum coming from the caterer's kitchen. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to tell you how I ended up holding that recording in the first place. Hello, my dear friends. Before I begin my story, I want to kindly ask you to subscribe to my channel. Leave a comment with the city you're listening from, and give this video a like. It means so much to me and helps me grow this channel so I can keep bringing you more stories. My name is Eleanor Hart, though nearly everyone calls me Ellie. I'm 71. Up until a couple of weeks ago, I would have told you my daughter Lila respected me. I was wrong about more than a few things. The wedding looked like a wine country fantasy, the kind people use as screensavers at work. The ceremony took place at the Carlisle family estate in Sonoma County, California, a villa tucked among rolling vines and silvery olive trees. The old stucco walls glowed honey gold at dusk. Lanterns flickered along stone terraces, and every direction smelled faintly of rosemary and crushed grapes. 200 guests, a 12-piece orchestra, and flowers that could have opened a satellite florist. Andrew Carlisle's family had the kind of money that doesn't panic at stock dips. His grandmother's portrait hung in the tasting room. His grandfather's name was etched on brass plaques across town. Lila had found exactly the life she'd been chasing. That morning, I'd driven down from Santa Rosa, where I rent a small, tidy apartment not far from the public library where I used to work. I wore a deep green dress I'd bought for the day. Classic cut, sensible heels, a vintage brooch of my mother's. It wasn't couture, but it was dignified. At least I thought so until I stepped into a sea of silk, custom tailoring, and diamonds that caught the light like ice. Lila really did look breathtaking. She wore Andrew's grandmother's Dior gown, altered to fit her perfectly. I had stored that gown for decades, cleaned it carefully each year, kept cedar sachets in the garment bag. I wore it the day I married Jack Hart, back when we believed that faithfulness, elbow grease, and luck could take the place of family fortunes. Lila insisted on wearing it, and I had been sentimental enough to think it meant she felt threaded to me. Naive, apparently, still lives at 71. The ceremony was flawless, the type of timeless elegance blogs fawn over. I sat in the second row, behind Lila's college roommate and her husband. Vivian Carlisle, Andrew's mother, occupied the front row, the seat for women accustomed to being seen first. Her pearl necklace probably had its own insurance policy. I'd met Vivian 8 months earlier. She'd greeted me with impeccable manners and a temperature just below freezing. During the cocktail hour, I wandered near the terrace doors to watch the vineyards go lavender with the coming evening. I heard my name float on the breeze, and before I moved, I recognized Lila's cadence. Bright, practiced, pleasantly important. She stood beside Vivian near the main floral installation, probably assuming the orchestra and clinked glassware would blur whatever she said. I've always had excellent hearing. It's a blessing and a curse, any mother will tell you. "Don't worry about her," Lila said softly, angling her chin toward me. "She's a hopeless embarrassment. Nothing like you. She's never done anything that matters. She shelved books at a public library for 3 decades. Can you imagine anything more soul-sapping?" Vivian nodded with sympathetic approval. "The best thing, dear, is that she knows her place. People from humbler backgrounds can be so persistent about inserting themselves. My fingers tightened around the stem of my champagne flute. Humbler backgrounds, as if integrity and hard work were outfits gone out of fashion. I thought of the double shifts I took so Lila could attend music camp, of the nights Jack and I ate soup because Lila needed a security deposit for her off-campus apartment. I thought of those months we paid for her therapy after a heartbreak that almost swallowed her, and I thought of the envelope in my purse. A week before he died, Jack had pressed it into my hand. "If Lila ever treats you poorly," he'd whispered, voice thin but steady, "read this out loud. Promise me, Ellie. She needs to hear a few things the way I saw them." I promised. I carried it ever since, never expecting to wield it. Standing there, listening to my daughter describe me like a defective appliance, I realized Jack had watched something I'd missed. He'd seen the shift in Lila during his final months, and he didn't like the direction of the wind. Dinner blurred into polite chatter. I was placed at table 8, the Switzerland of wedding seating, far enough to avoid optics, close enough to appear included. The people around me were nice in the way you're nice to your Uber driver. Our conversation stuck to the weather, the gorgeous hydrangeas, and curated compliments about the menu. Nobody asked what I did for a living. I ate a few polite bites of salmon, smiled when appropriate, and watched Lila move across the room like a candidate at a fundraiser, shaking hands, laughing lightly, remembering names, always camera ready. To be fair, Lila is gifted at what she does. She works in brand strategy for boutique tech and lifestyle clients. High-touch narrative architecture, she calls it. She knows how to make a room feel warmer by stepping into it. Tonight, she was the perfect bride for the Carlisle orbit, poised, luminous, and exactly what generational donors want, photographed next to their nameplates. But I know another Lila, the one who came home at 24, tear-swollen, after a relationship detonated. The one who once sat through the night by her father's hospice bed, singing under her breath, promising to look out for me. Or so I had thought. The orchestra played "The Way You Look Tonight," Jack's forever favorite. With Jack gone, Lila danced with Andrew. She smiled through it, a smile that said 1,000 people would step in before she'd let absence ruin a photograph. When the song ended, she didn't glance toward the empty chair where I'd placed Jack's picture. I stared at the photo, felt something lock into place, and knew I had to read Jack's words. Not to punish my daughter, but to hold up a mirror I should have held up long ago. While guests spilled onto the patio for espresso and miniature desserts, I slipped into the villa's library. The room smelled of leather and lemon oil. A ladder leaned against soaring shelves of first editions. The Carlyles probably owned more volumes than the branch where I'd worked, though I suspected many were selected by designers. I took out the envelope, Jack's name and looping script on the front. For Ellie. Only if it's necessary. Inside lay a single page written 3 days before he died. "My dearest Ellie," it began in Jack's careful hand. "If you're reading this, Lila has shown you who she has become, not who she used to be. This will hurt. But you need to know what I saw when things got quiet." My heart hammered. I read anyway. "Since she started seeing Andrew, she's changed. Not just happy, but calculating. She's asked about our accounts, my will, what happens to you. She says it's concern. That isn't the word I'd use." A chill ran through me, separate from the library's air conditioning. Yesterday she brought brochures for Cedar Ridge residents. Jack had underlined the name. An upscale senior living community an hour away. She had pricing sheets, a waitlist application. She called it planning ahead. I asked why a 71-year-old woman who still handles everything needs to plan that way. The letter continued, each paragraph another small cut. Jack noted Lila's impatience with co-pays, the grocery receipts, my new arthritis prescription. I changed my will, he wrote. Everything to you, with language she can't challenge. But please remember, the daughter we raised still exists under there. She's lost her bearings. Do not let her convince you that you are a burden. You were the best thing I did with my life. If she can't see it, that's her loss. He signed it. Forever yours, Jack, and added a postscript that made my hands tremble. I saw the Cedar Ridge brochure in her purse again. She's planning something. Don't let it happen. I folded the paper, tracing his name like a rosary. Jack spent his last days not only fighting cancer, but trying to shield me from the daughter he adored and feared. He left me the testimony I needed, in case my own hope made me deaf. I returned to the reception with his voice in my pocket. What he wrote didn't reveal fraud or secret crimes. It was observation, the simple record of a man dying with his eyes open. It was enough. Lila hadn't spontaneously turned unkind. She had been plotting a version of my future that didn't include my consent. You don't pack brochures for planning ahead in a purse unless the decision feels imminent. Jack knew. He'd tried to tell me the only way he could. Back at table 8, a young man I half recognized materialized at my elbow. Mrs. Hart, I'm Grant, Andrew's cousin. He wanted to make sure you're having a good time. Can I get you anything? I thanked him and lied politely. Everything is lovely. The Carlyles put on a good show, he said, with a conspiratorial grin. He glanced toward Lila, laughing near the bandstand. I'm glad Drew found someone practical. Some of the women he dated, well, he lowered his voice. Your daughter seems refreshingly grounded. Grounded, I repeated. If only he knew what she wanted to do with me and my so-called grounding. I excused myself and drifted toward the doors. On the patio, the sky deepened to ink, and the lanterns brightened. The estate felt like a film set, every angle composed. Watching Lila, I recognized another truth Jack had guessed. She wasn't just marrying a man. She was attaching herself to a trajectory, the Carlyle family's long, polished climb. Vivian was not merely Andrew's mother. She was the project manager of their place in Northern California's cultural life. Lila fit perfectly into that blueprint, an educated, articulate 32-year-old who could lead a gala committee and post an earnest caption afterward. What about me? I studied women Vivian's age moving with the ease of people whose bills have never decided their mood. There is a special kind of security that grows when mortgage payments never gnawed and retirement accounts never looked like roulette. That serenity is what Lila wanted. Not just wealth, but the peace of not thinking about it. In that calculus, an older mother with ordinary assets becomes a risk to be managed, preferably in a place with scheduled bingo and predictable billing. The bouquet toss brought Lila near enough to catch my eye. She smiled, an actual, unvarnished smile, like a small bridge between us. For a second, I wondered whether Jack's letter inflated little things into suspicions. Then, after the toss, Lila slipped back beside Vivian. I heard her say, loud enough for me to catch, "Thank goodness that's over." I was worried some desperate woman might injure herself. Vivian tittered. At our age, she said, remarriage is rather undignified, don't you think? Lila's tone turned airy. Oh, Mom's past all that. She's focusing on gentle, age-appropriate routines now. Accepting limitations can be freeing. Limitations. At 71, I was apparently a person who should arrange herself tidily along the margins of other people's lives. Jack's letter no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a life jacket. The next morning, I drove home north along Highway 101, watching the vineyards recede in the rearview mirror. By the time I reached Santa Rosa, my heart had steadied into resolve. Jack's words reframed every recent conversation with Lila, and I knew I had homework. My first stop Monday wasn't the market or the pharmacy. It was the public library, where I spent 30 years coaxing answers out of databases for people who had questions they were shy to ask. Ellie, Margaret, our head of adult services, and my friend of 27 years, pulled me into a hug. "Tell me everything about that wine country glamour wedding. Did you meet a vintner? Are you eloping to Europe with a cellist?" "It was a production," I said carefully, "but I actually need your help with something less sparkly." I lowered my voice. "I'm looking up assisted living facilities in the region, particularly one called Cedar Ridge Residence." Margaret's eyes flashed with curiosity, the good kind. "Another reason I love librarians: we don't interrogate motives until invited. We respect the question first." Within an hour, we had a manila folder thick with printouts. Cedar Ridge photographed beautifully on its site, sunlit lounges and yoga classes with sweeping views. But the footnotes told another story: a lifetime care program that required transferring assets for resident security, aggressive marketing flagged by watchdog groups, 2 prior state investigations for questionable sales tactics after bereavement, and a settlement reached with 3 families who felt pressured. Margaret slid the last sheet toward me. "They're skilled at acquiring clients, and those clients' estates," she said dryly. "It reads like a place designed to smooth anxiety with cappuccinos while a notary slides papers across a table." I thanked her, slid the folder into my tote, and walked into the Sonoma sunlight with something I hadn't had the night before: a plan. Jack's letter was the beginning. Now I needed to know exactly what Lila intended and whose idea it had been. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Jenna, Lila's college roommate, who had been at the wedding and remains far more candid than my daughter about the social currents she swims in. I pretended I needed a mailing address to send Vivian a proper thank you note. This part was technically true. Then asked casual questions about the Carlyles. What I learned confirmed my instincts. The Carlyles were indeed wealthy, but old, in Northern California terms, means post-war manufacturing meets smart investments. The Carlyle Vineyard story included shrewd acquisitions, a well-timed pivot, and decades of philanthropy curated by Vivian. "Lila is so lucky," Jenna sighed. "Vivian's already getting her on museum committees. They want her on the Children's Arts Board by fall. She's basically getting the fast pass to the donor circuit." After I hung up, I sat very still in my little living room, looking at the succulents my neighbor watered when I forgot. It wasn't just that Lila had married a man with resources. She had married into a machine with glossy brochures and a calendar booked to 2027. And Vivian saw my daughter as an ideal component: young, presentable, media literate. That explained the Polish. It didn't yet explain the urgency about my life. Then I remembered something Jack had noticed: Lila's unease with costs, my co-pays, my rent. The cataract consult she thought was optional because I still drove fine during the day. I pulled out my checkbook register, the one I still keep in pen. My expenses had risen. Nothing dramatic, but age adjusts a budget the way vines expand a fence, quietly, insistently. New arthritis meds, higher Medicare supplement, a rent bump the management company called market alignment. If I ever needed more than ibuprofen and optimism, if I fell, if I needed a home health aid, my modest savings could dwindle quickly. Then the big click came. Lila wasn't afraid I needed help today. She was terrified I might need expensive help eventually, help that could shrink whatever she imagined inheriting from me and Jack. Planning ahead, in her mind, meant placing me where my care would be somebody's business plan, not her unexpected responsibility. That night, The former version of me would have cried in the shower and baked lemon bars to cope. The new version, armed with Jack's letter and Margaret's file, made tea, set the letter on the table like a compass, and promised my reflection I would not be maneuvered into a place because it was tidy for someone else's calendar. 2 weeks after the wedding, Lila called with an invitation to lunch. Her voice was bright, sugar on the rim. That tone used to melt me. Oh, good. She's in a loving mood. Now I recognize it for what it is, the sound of someone putting the conversation on rails. We met at a trendy bistro in Healdsburg, one of those spots where the lettering on the window looks hand-gilded and the water comes with a lemon slice by default. Lila glowed with the soft sheen of a honeymoon, spent tagging the Amalfi Coast and Venice locations. Marriage had given her a higher wattage confidence, proof that proximity to the Carlisle orbit was, in her mind, a personal victory. "Mom, you look tired," she said, air-kissing both cheeks the way she'd learned from someone else's mother. "Are you sleeping? Eating properly? I worry about you rattling around that little place all by yourself." She chattered about the honeymoon, Andrew's family place in St. Helena, the board's Vivian was steering her toward, the gala theme she'd already ideated for next spring. It sounded like someone reading copy for a lifestyle ad. Finally, after coffee arrived and her plate looked photogenic enough to ignore, Lila shifted to the true agenda. "Mom, Drew and I have been talking. We're concerned about your future. That apartment is small, the neighborhood's shifting, and, well, independence is wonderful, until it isn't." She smiled, bright, sympathetic, curated. Vivian knows of this exceptional senior community, Cedar Ridge residents. Very exclusive, very secure, excellent programming. There's a rare opening next month. The wait list is usually years. I set my cup down deliberately. "A senior community," I repeated. "Lila, I'm perfectly capable of living on my own." "Of course you are, for now. But it's smart to plan ahead." Her hand slid over mine like she was offering a blessing. "The best part? You wouldn't need to think about finances again. They have a program where you transfer assets in exchange for guaranteed lifetime care. You'd be safe, everything handled." There it was, the business plan with a patina of kindness. The same program Margaret and I had highlighted with yellow marker. "That's thorough," I said. "I'm not ready to make that kind of decision, honey. I like my life. I like unlocking my own front door." Lila's smile thinned a millimeter. "Mom, I know it's tough admitting you might need help, but Dad's been gone 3 years. You can't keep pretending you can carry everything forever. It's not healthy." "I'm not pretending." I folded my napkin. "Are you?" Her tone sharpened, just a hair. "Because lately you've seemed scattered. You've missed a couple of calls. You forgot your dentist appointment." She took a breath. "Vivian thought you looked a little out of place at the wedding." Heat climbed my neck. I looked out of place because I was listening to you call me a hopeless embarrassment. That's disorienting. Her head snapped back like I'd flicked water at her. "I never said. You told Vivian I had never accomplished anything that mattered, that shelving books was depressing." That was exaggerated." She fumbled with her napkin. "I was trying to reassure her you wouldn't be difficult. I meant that you have reasonable expectations about your role in our lives going forward." There it was, the mask slipping, the script showing its staples. "This isn't about a comment," she went on quickly. "This is about being practical. You're 71. She used the number like proof on a chart. "We need to plan." I signaled for the check. "I am planning. I am planning to keep making my own decisions until I can't. And when I can't, I will tell you what kind of help I want, not the other way around. And if you fall, if you have a stroke, If your mind changes? Her voice climbed. The restaurant kept humming around us, the clink of cutlery almost comical under the topic. Who do you expect to handle that? I could finally see the fear under her choreography. Not about me now, but about a future where my needs might interrupt her storyline. I expect you to see me as a person worth including, not a problem to be solved. If one day I need help, we'll plan together, not by shuttling me somewhere a donor recommended. On my drive home, I replayed every syllable. Jack's letter had given me permission. Margaret's file gave me facts. Lila believed she was being strategic. She was, in effect, telling on herself. The old Ellie would have begged to remain in the picture. The current Ellie reviewed the documents again, put extra copies in a folder labeled "If Needed," and placed Jack's page on top. A month after the bistro conversation, Lila called again. Voices murmured behind her. Her tone had the formal brightness of someone presenting a proposal to a board. "Mom, can you come by tonight? Andrew and I and Vivian want to talk about some family matters." I knew exactly which matters. I still said yes. I spent the afternoon reading Jack's letter twice, then a third time, until my anger cooled into clarity. I tucked the page and the Cedar Ridge file into my purse. Their West Healdsburg house looked like a magazine profile of modern tradition. White clapboard with black window trim, citrus trees in symmetric pots, a door knocker shaped like a crest. Inside, I found Lila perched beside Andrew and Vivian on a cream sofa. They sat in a shallow V facing a single armchair, the interrogation chair set up for me. "Eleanor," Vivian began with warm authority, "we've noticed a few concerns lately." Lila jumped in. "Mom, you've missed some appointments. You seem distracted. Sometimes your phone goes straight to voicemail." Andrew nodded gravely. "We think you may be experiencing some early cognitive changes." His tone managed to be both gentle and rehearsed. They had built a narrative out of soft clay, not outright lies, just stretching normal life into diagnosis-shaped shadows. The dentist appointment I rescheduled because the bus line changed. The unreturned calls that belong to telemarketers. The voicemail that fills because I actually do have friends who leave me long messages about book club picks. "The good news," Vivian continued, "is that we secured an opening at Cedar Ridge Residence. It's rare. We can make this seamless." Andrew lifted a folder. "Power of attorney forms, asset transfer agreements, healthcare directives, the full packet. We'll walk you through it. It's designed to protect your interests." There was a time I would have panicked at a stack like that just for the optics of it. Instead, I looked at each of them. The woman who curated family life like an exhibition. The son who had learned to express empathy like a well-tuned cello. The daughter who, to her credit, looked nervous now that the plan had to breathe in front of me. "This is quite a production," I said evenly. "How long have you been rehearsing?" "Mom," Lila said, voice wobbling, "this isn't a performance. We're worried." "I'm sure you are," I replied. I slid Jack's envelope onto my lap and removed the letter. "I brought something you might find clarifying." I read Jack's words aloud, calmly, like I used to read picture books at story time, only this time the room was full of adults who weren't sure which story they were in. I included every observation, the brochures in Lila's purse, the questions about estate disposition, the impatience with costs, the detail that she proposed Cedar Ridge while her father was still breathing. Color left Lila's face. Andrew's jaw tightened. Vivian's expression barely moved, only her fingers betrayed her in a small, involuntary clasp. When I finished, silence spread like fog. Andrew finally turned to his wife. "Is that true? You brought assisted living brochures to your father's bedside?" "That letter proves nothing," Lila said, but her voice trembled. Dad was medicated. He was probably anxious and misread. Your father did not misread, I said. He was meticulous about what mattered, and nothing mattered more to him than us. Andrew examined the folder on the coffee table. When did you start researching Cedar Ridge? He asked Lila quietly. I was being prepared, she said, defensive. Someone had to plan Mom's aging. While your father was dying, Andrew said, almost to himself. This time I heard something like anger under his smooth tone. Vivian attempted a course correction. Andrew, focusing on past choices doesn't solve what's at hand, Eleanor's safety. Speaking of which, I said, opening my tote, I did research of my own. I placed Margaret's printouts on the table, lining up the highlighted sections like you'd line up evidence in a civics class. Cedar Ridge has twice been investigated by the state for aggressive marketing to vulnerable seniors, particularly widows. They also run an asset protection track that ensures residents transfer ownership of whatever they own. For the first time since I met Vivian, I saw heat rise along her cheekbones. Any reputable facility undergoes reviews, she said. Outliers occur. These aren't outliers, I replied. These are patterns. They deliver cappuccinos and urgency in the same breath. Andrew leaned over the documents. These families say they felt forced to make permanent decisions during grief. They signed over homes within days. He looked at Lila. Did you ever check independent sources? Or did someone recommend Cedar Ridge and you accepted the brochure? Lila stared at the table. Silence pooled. Vivian cleared her throat. In certain circles, Cedar Ridge is considered certain circles that need a place for inconvenient relatives, I said, still polite. What you're describing is warehouse elegance. It's not a life. It's optics with a billing department. That's a terrible accusation, Lila snapped, emotion rushing back into her. We're trying to ensure care. No, I said softly. You're trying to ensure convenience. I stood. Proper care asks the person what she wants. Convenience decides for her. Andrew continued scanning. Some of these complaints escalated to lawsuits. Pressure to decide immediately. Aggressive presentation tied to grief. Regretted signing asset transfers. He pinched the bridge of his nose. This is bad. Vivian's poise frayed another stitch. Every industry has a handful of discontented clients, she said. Cedar Ridge markets directly through funeral homes, I replied, pointing to a line on one report. They host planning luncheons for new widows. This isn't a handful, it's a funnel. All three absorbed that. Lila looked queasy. Andrew looked angry. At whom? I wasn't yet sure. Vivian looked like she was mentally rearranging chess pieces. Even if Cedar Ridge has flaws, Lila said finally, clinging to a plank in a storm, you still need a plan. You can't live alone indefinitely, Mom. Why not? I asked gently. I am 71, not 91. I'm healthy. I carry my groceries. I memorize library call numbers for fun. I let the humor break the tension by a hair. Please don't decide I'm fragile because I prefer paper to pills. What if you fall? What if you get sick? What if your mind slips? Lila's voice climbed again, the scaffolding of fear visible. Then that is when we decide, I said, and the decision will involve me, not just a signature line with a fountain pen and a congratulatory smile. Family decisions must include everyone's interests, Vivian said crisply. Harmony matters. Yes, I said, which is why I'm asking directly. Vivian, what is your interest in me signing those? I indicated the stack. She sat straighter, the way people do when they step into a familiar role. My interest is the family's stability. Sarah is my daughter-in-law. You're part of this family. And I am a person with a life, I said. not a reputational variable. "Mom," Lila whispered. Her eyes shone. Anger, embarrassment, fear. Something softer moving under them. "What do you want?" The question hung there, simple as a chair. It hadn't been asked yet in all the conversations about me. I answered plainly, "I want to stay in my apartment as long as I can. I want control over my health care. I want my money to remain mine until I choose otherwise. I want to be treated like a competent adult." I met my daughter's eyes. "And I want you to respect me, not out of obligation, but because I've earned it." Tears broke free on Lila's lashes. "I do respect you, Mom. Her voice thinned. "I'm scared. I watched you take care of Dad and I thought, I can't do that. I won't be enough. I won't be patient enough or good enough. So I decided to find professionals who could be. If I handled it now, maybe I wouldn't have to face failing you later." For the first time in months, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a doorway. "Being scared," I said, "doesn't earn you the right to run my life. It earns you the right to say you're scared." We didn't sign anything that night. We didn't decide much beyond the fact that I would not be moving to Cedar Ridge, and I would not be signing a power of attorney while fully capable of deciding when to cut my own bangs. I left their house exactly the way I'd come in, standing up straight, walking under my own name. Driving home, the moon hung over the dark vines like a coin you couldn't spend. Jack's letter lay warm from my hand on the passenger seat. The words that kept me from making myself small to fit inside someone else's plan. Lila had peeled back enough of her tough new skin for me to see the raw little animal underneath. Fear of the hard parts of love. I understood that animal. I feed it in myself all the time. You just don't let it steer. When I unlocked my front door, the quiet held. On the counter sat the folder labeled "If Needed," and next to it a fresh notebook. Old habits. When life gets complicated, I make lists. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "What I want," in writing. Under it, I drafted a simple, unapologetic plan. Doctors I trust, friends who volunteered to check in weekly, the legal clinic at the senior center that helps with limited durable powers, tailored to specific situations, not blank checks. I listed the phone numbers of 2 home health agencies with good reputations, and no asset transfer nonsense, should I ever need help bathing or changing a bandage. Then, because Jack would have told me to keep living instead of circling the drain, I added a second heading, "What I want, besides not dying." I wrote, "Join the library's travel writing group. Try Tai Chi in the park. Call Robert from the lecture series." A retired English professor who laughed at my jokes and asked whether I preferred Monroe or Cheever. "Both, thank you." I wrote, "Make a list of places I promised myself I'd see when we were too broke to fly anywhere. Ireland at the top." I slid Jack's letter into a plastic sleeve and tucked it in the folder. I set the folder where someone could find it if needed. Then I changed into my soft robe, heated a bowl of leftover soup, and sat in my favorite chair. I looked up at the framed photo of Jack in his fishing hat, grinning at a trout he almost returned to the creek. "I'm okay," I said into the room. "I'm not going anywhere. I didn't choose." I woke before sunrise the next morning with the odd sensation that a piece of the night had come loose and slid under my skin. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your own breathing sound showy. I brewed coffee and stood at the kitchen window while the kettle clicked, watching the neighbor's orange cat unspool itself along the top of the fence. On the counter was the folder I'd made. My plan, in my handwriting, not anyone else's. And beside it, Jack's letter, now in its protective sleeve. I touched the plastic the way you touch a gravestone, gentle, a little embarrassed to be sentimental in your own kitchen. There was something I hadn't told anyone yet. Not Margaret, not Jenna, not even my bathroom mirror. It kept tapping at me now, nagging, as if memory were a neighbor leaning over the fence to say, "Hey, you forgot your keys." I rinsed my cup, dried it, and carried my coffee to the little table by the window. At the wedding, when the toasts began, Andrew's best man telling a story about their college road trip, Lila's maid of honor crying halfway through a joke about freshman year. I stood too. I didn't plan it. My body got the message first, like how you stand on a bus before you remember your stop is next. People turned. The MC looked confused but handed me the microphone because I looked like a woman who would handle it carefully. "I'll be brief," I said, and watched 100 shoulders settle into polite patience. "I just want to give the bride a wedding gift from someone who couldn't be here." I pulled my phone from my small purse and tapped the file I had saved with shaking fingers a month after Jack died. The one I barely listened to myself because his voice made my bones go hollow. Jack recorded it on his old-school handheld recorder. I had transferred it to my phone a year later, thinking technology might make it hurt less. It didn't. I held the microphone close to my phone's speaker, and the room filled with the familiar rasp I missed every ordinary day. Jack cleared his throat on the recording, like he always did when he was about to say something he'd rehearsed. "Hi, kiddo," he said. "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it to the wedding. I wanted to be the one to step on your dress by accident and make you laugh. I wanted to dance with you to that Sinatra tune we spun to in the kitchen when you were 12. I wanted to embarrass you with a story and then pull you into the biggest hug. Since I can't do that, let me say this instead." 100 faces softened. The string lights seemed to hum. "I love you, and I love the way your mother loves you. There's not much else I know for sure, but I know that your mother is the reason you're brave and kind and stubborn in the good way. If someday the world tries to convince you otherwise, if anyone suggests your mother is anything but the backbone of this whole operation, remember that I said it here, out loud, where God and the bartender can hear me. Your mother is the best thing I ever did." I didn't look at Lila. I didn't move. I just held the phone steady over the microphone, and Jack kept talking, gentle and wry, the way he did when he wanted to make truth land like a pillow, not a brick. "And if the future gets complicated and you start thinking about making plans for her without asking her," he said, and I swear to you the room bent forward as one creature, "don't. Ask her. She knows what she wants. She always has. Your job is to listen and to love her, not to manage her like a spreadsheet." He laughed a little. "Okay, that's enough. I can hear your mother rolling her eyes at me for getting sentimental. Eat cake, dance. And kiddo, be good to your mom. She's my whole world." The recording clicked off. In the silence afterward, you could hear the fountain outside and someone's bracelet sliding against glass. I handed the microphone back to the MC, nodded at no one, and sat. I did not look at Vivian. I did not look at my daughter. I stared at Jack's photo in the empty chair and at the thumbprint on the champagne flute in front of me, and I did not cry because I was not going to let a room full of people decide what my face looked like. So yes, I played that message, and the room did go still. The rest of the evening spooled forward like a movie you've already seen. That night, in bed, I wondered if Jack would have thought I'd gone too far. In the morning, I decided he'd think I'd done exactly enough. Now, with the cat long gone from the fence and the coffee cooling, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I've learned that the calls you avoid become errands for later. "Hello? Eleanor, this is Miriam, the social worker from the senior center. Her voice was calm, the way you sound when you spend your days absorbing other people's worry. Margaret gave me your number. She said you might want a neutral party to walk through some options, on your terms. I smiled. Margaret is a menace in all the best ways. If you're open to it, I can stop by tomorrow, Miriam said. We can talk through what staying independent looks like, not because you need to justify yourself to anyone, but because it helps to have paperwork ready before you ever need it. We set a time. After I hung up, I wrote, Miriam, Tuesday, 11, on the fridge calendar, where I still tracked my life with a black felt tip marker. Then I called the Senior Center Legal Clinic to make an appointment about a limited medical power of attorney, one that only sprang into effect if a doctor said I couldn't make decisions for myself. I didn't love the subject, but loving or not loving a subject doesn't change whether you need to pass the test. That afternoon, as if the universe wanted to make sure I didn't accidentally relax, Lila texted, Can we talk this week? Just us. I stared at the words until they blurred and the sentence felt like a trick of the light. Then I typed back, Thursday, 3 p.m., the cafe by the library. Neutral ground. She replied with a thumbs up and a heart, and then, a second later, nothing. For the first time in months, the little dots didn't appear to deliver a follow-up instruction. On Thursday, she arrived 5 minutes late, which told me she was either trying to avoid the awkward moment of first eye contact or she'd misjudged how long it takes to park in a neighborhood that believes parking is a character flaw. She looked different, not fallen apart different, more like someone who'd taken off a heavy necklace and forgotten to put it back on. I've been thinking, she said, fingers wrapped around her cup for heat she didn't need in July. A lot. She did not perform her thinking for me. She just said the words like bricks in a path. I talked to a therapist. She asked me when I started being afraid of you getting older. And it was when Dad got sick. I watched you take care of him, and it looked like a job that never ended. I decided I would fail that job, so I started planning so I wouldn't have to try, so I could outsource the part where I might be a disappointment. She didn't look at me. She looked at the wooden table, at the shadow her cup made on the grain. I could see 12-year-old Lila in the set of her mouth, the girl who got a 92 and thought she'd wrecked her life. I'm not asking for a medal, she said. I'm telling you I see it now, what I did, what I almost did, and I'm sorry. I didn't rush to cover her with absolution. That's a bad habit in mothers. We slap a napkin over the mess, so we can all pretend the table was always clean. I took a breath and kept my voice level. Being scared is human, I said. Trying to fix fear by controlling someone else? That's tempting, but it's still wrong. She nodded, eyes shining. I know. Then she laughed once, without humor. Vivian thinks this is all a communications problem. She told me I should have managed the message better. She rolled her eyes, not the dramatic teen roll, but a small, weary circle. Andrew is not thrilled. He said he was embarrassed when he realized how far I'd gone. He apologized to me for not paying attention. He apologized to you in his head. He said he's going to call. Good, I said, and meant it. I like Andrew when he's not doing a magazine spread impression of himself. We talked for an hour, not about boards or committees or strategy, but about old things. The way Jack used to heat the spoon under hot water before scooping ice cream because he said you had to treat your tools right. The day Lila learned to ride a bike on a block with a slight downhill, and how terrified I was to let go, and how proud she was when she wobbled and didn't fall. The time her first-grade teacher told me Lila was bossy, and how I came home and told Lila to keep being clear about what she wanted and to learn to invite other people along, because the world punishes girls for knowing where they're going. When she stood to leave, she squeezed my hand. "If you ever do need help, real help, not let me fix you help, will you tell me? Will you let me be part of the solution without driving the car?" "I will," I said. "And I need you to promise me something too. Anything. If I say no to your version of help, you will believe me. You won't call 12 other people to get the answer you want." She laughed, genuinely this time, the laugh I missed. Deal. In the weeks that followed, our phone calls changed shape. They weren't one-sided updates with bullet points and action items. She asked how the library book club went. I told her about Robert, the retired professor who wore linen in summer and corduroy like a hug in winter. She teased me about how I said his name, and I said she was imagining things, and then I admitted she wasn't. Lila told me about a client who wanted a brand story about authenticity, and then insisted on staging a picnic with rented children. I told her to take the money and use it to fund a local school's library wish list. Miriam came by, and we drafted a care plan that belonged to me. It had sensible contingencies: who to call if I didn't pick up the phone for 2 days, which neighbor had an extra key, which hospital I preferred if anyone had a choice, what kind of help I'd be open to at what points. We printed 2 copies. One went in the folder under the magnet shaped like a pear. One went to Lila in a sealed envelope. "Don't open unless truly necessary," I wrote on the front. I knew she would honor that. Or I hoped my face in her head would be stern enough to keep her hands off the flap. The legal clinic helped me update my advance directive and draft a springing medical power of attorney that named Lila and Margaret together. 2 signatures required, not 1, and only effective if a physician wrote on paper that I couldn't make decisions. When I signed, I felt something uncoil in me, like a cat settling. 3 months after the wedding, my phone rang on a Thursday morning. "Eleanor, it's Andrew." He sounded like a man about to jump into a lake and hoping someone told him the season. "Do you have a minute?" "I do. I owe you an apology, a real one. I let my mother turn our concern into a plan that centered optics and convenience. I didn't interrogate that because it's the water I grew up swimming in. I'm sorry." I sat down at the small desk where I pay bills and keep stamps because I like licking the back of something official. "Thank you," I said. "That matters." "There's something else," he said, warming. "Lila says you always wanted to see Ireland. We're going to Europe next spring. My mother actually suggested we invite you as our guest." He laughed like he knew how that sounded, and chose the version where we say it anyway. "I promise this isn't an obligation trip. You'd have your own room, your own days. We'd overlap where it's fun for everyone. No asset transfers required." "Tempting," I said, and felt a small bubble rise in my chest. I thought of green hills and the sound of rain on a stone wall. Let me think. Of course, no pressure. After we hung up, I sat for a long time. The world tilts in small degrees, not earthquakes. Sometimes you wake up and realize a person you were ready to close the book on has started a new chapter without asking your permission. And somehow, that doesn't make you angry. It makes you curious. I said yes to the trip 2 weeks later and started a list in the back of my notebook titled "Things That Will Not Be Practical, But I Want Anyway." On it I wrote, "A real wool sweater that smells like a sheep when it rains, a pint in a pub where no one cares if I finish it, and standing in a library so old it makes me laugh." Meanwhile, life kept doing what it does when you're not staring at it, unfolding. Robert and I graduated from talk at lectures to take a walk after the lecture, to you should see the used bookstore, where the owner keeps poetry under the counter like contraband. We didn't rush to define anything because rushing is for trains. One Saturday, Lila and I met at the farmer's market. She showed up in jeans and a t-shirt without a logo. We bought peaches so ripe they leaked through the bag. We sat on a low wall and ate them with napkins and made a mess like people who are not auditioning for a lifestyle brand. Vivian is making an adjustment, Lila said, wiping her chin. She keeps recommending committees and then catching herself. She still thinks in committees, but she's less sure she should be in charge of you. That's progress, I said. She asked last week if you were still harboring resentment. Lila smirked. I told her you don't harbor anything. You dock what you want, and you send the rest back to sea. I laughed and pretended to bow. Tell her that makes me a harbor master. You know she'll look up whether that's a board she can get you on. We snorted like teenagers. It felt like cheating on our old mother-daughter dynamic, and I was happy to be a thief. Winter slid in sideways, as it does in Northern California. Sudden puddles, eucalyptus scent. On Tuesdays, Robert and I went to the Art House Theater to watch old black and white films with a handful of other people who clap at credits. On Thursdays, I called Lila. Sometimes she beat me to it. We didn't fill the calls with updates. We told each other little things. The cashier who called me Queen for remembering my reusable bags. The line in a book that made Lila cry on the train, and how she pretended she was allergic to something elegant. The day Andrew told Vivian no about something and kept saying no until it stayed. No. Small pebbles carried back from separate beaches. One night in late February, my phone buzzed with a text from Lila. Can I ask an awkward question? You can always ask, I wrote. Did Dad's letter make you hate me? Or did it save us? I stared at the screen, thinking of the way grief makes you into a person you don't recognize, and how love tries to paint over it with its broadest brush. I typed, it made me angry enough to draw a line, and it made me tender enough to believe you could step back from it. A pause then. Thank you for not giving up when you had every reason to. I set the phone down and looked at Jack's photo. She's trying, I told him. We are, both of us. The house settled around me. Somewhere outside, a teenager's bass thumped like a new heart learning its job. Spring cleaned the air, and our trip to Ireland moved from a sentence to an itinerary. Vivian, to her credit, handled logistics like a person who could run a small country. She booked us separate rooms in a modest hotel in Dublin near a museum I loved on paper already. She arranged a few group dinners and left blocks of open days where my calendar simply read, Ellie, do whatever you want. She even asked what I might like to see beyond the obvious. Libraries, I said. Not the tourist ones. I mean, yes, those too, but the small ones where the librarian will tell me which shelf holds the neighborhood's heart. She wrote it down like it was a menu item, and then sent me 3 possibilities with opening hours and the bus routes marked. I said, thank you, in full sentences. The night before we were to leave, Lila came over with my favorite pastries and 2 travel-sized packets of motion sickness chews, because she remembers that I get woozy on buses if I try to read. We laid clothes on my bed and argued companionably about how many sweaters a person needs when one can be layered. I won. I am the person, and I say too. Can I ask you something before you go be glamorous in a wool sweater? She said, sitting on the foot of the bed, her voice going softer. Last year, in the thick of everything, were you really ready to cut me off if I kept pushing? Or did you take a breath and hope I'd turn around? I folded a scarf and set it on the stack. Both can be true, I said. I wrote down the boundary like a person who means it. I also left the door open because you're my child, and I am stubborn about loving you. She nodded, tears standing but not falling. I want to be worthy of that. Worth has nothing to do with it, I said. But you're doing fine. She laughed wetly. Tell that to Vivian. She thinks I'm doing fine at not understanding that sometimes the efficient solution is the right one. Sometimes the efficient solution is the right one. For spreadsheets, I said. For people, the right one is usually the one that involves listening, and it tends to take longer than anyone wants. Lila stood and hugged me tightly. I love you, Mom, not the idea of you. You. I love you back, I said into her hair, even when your ideas make me want to hide your car keys. She left with a wave at the photo of Jack on the bookshelf. If you see a rainbow, she called from the door, pretend Dad arranged it. The flight felt shorter than flights used to feel when I was young and every hour stretched like taffy. Vivian did not hover on the plane. She read a novel with a silver cover and put her mask on for sleeping like a person who does not care if she looks odd if it earns her an hour of comfort. Andrew worked on his laptop and closed it when I asked what he was reading, because he has learned that manners begin where screens end. Lila watched a ridiculous comedy and laughed out loud twice, then pressed her lips together and looked at me like she'd been caught singing in church. On our first morning in Dublin, rain polished the streets. I left a note on the little desk in my room, gone wandering, back by 2, and walked out with my umbrella and the address of a library written on an index card in my pocket. The librarian at the desk wore a cardigan the color of time and looked at me over her glasses like she'd known me in another life. She recommended the poetry shelf by the radiator because that one gets the sun first. I thumbed through thin books with big feelings and thought about the life I had built and the life that had tried to recruit me into its efficiency. I thought about Jack's voice saying, "Ask your mother," into a room that needed to be told. I thought about my own voice saying no in a living room where I was not supposed to set terms. No is a small word that builds a big house if you say it with love. At lunch, we ate stew that steamed the windows. Vivian asked about the library. I told her about the radiator and the time cardigan and the poem that made me want to write in the margins. She smiled, actually smiled, without adjusting it midair, and said, "I'm glad you went." We spent a week like that. We did some things together. An evening of music where the fiddler's elbow looked like it might fly off. A day trip where sheep stopped traffic and didn't apologize. And many things apart. I learned that Andrew becomes kinder when he doesn't have to host. I learned that Vivian, in a country where no one expects her to make decisions, will sit in a cafe and quietly watch people like an amateur anthropologist, and then tell you which couples are fighting and which ones are flirting, and be right more often than not. On our last afternoon, I took a bus by myself to a small coastal town because I wanted to see the kind of gray water that scares off postcards. The wind tried to take my umbrella. I let it. I stood on a low stone wall and thought about a different stone, a different wall, the one I had built around the part of me that believed I was allowed to be the main character in my own aging. It wasn't a wall to keep people out. It was a wall to give my garden a boundary, so things could grow where they were planted. When I came back to the hotel, Lila was in the lobby with 2 cups of tea. "I was about to send out a search party with reflective vests," she said, handing me one. "You would have drafted a communications plan first," I said. "Probably," she admitted. "Hey, thank you for inviting me back into your life on your terms. I know it's not a prize, it's work." "Love is labor," I said. "The good kind." She squeezed my hand. "I'm learning." I believed her. On the plane home, while the cabin lights slept and the air hummed, I opened my notebook to the page where I keep the list titled, "What I Want," in writing. I added a new line, "Keep being a person who does not vanish." Under it, I wrote, "Teach Lila to do the same." Back in Santa Rosa, my apartment felt exactly right. I unpacked slowly, the way you do when you want the trip to last one more day. The sweater I bought smelled like rain and sheep. I put it on, even though it wasn't cold enough, and made tea. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. How was the island with more books than sheep? I wrote back. Hard to tell. The sheep read quickly. When Lila called that evening for our usual check-in, we talked for 20 minutes about silly things. The tiny soap in the hotel, the flight attendant who looked like she could land the plane with her mind, the couple who got engaged on a cliff, and how I wanted to yell, "Check your footing first." Then, because honesty had become our family's new muscle, she said, "I had a moment on the trip where I looked at you walking ahead of me, and I realized something." "What's that?" "That I don't want you to be manageable. I want you to be you, even when it's inconvenient, especially then." I sat very still and looked at Jack's photo. "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me." "Don't tell Vivian," she said, and we both laughed. A week later, Andrew called again, this time to ask about a charity he was considering supporting. "I know you'll tell me if the library's needs are boring to donors," he said, "but we're looking for boring. We're looking for keeps the lights on boring." "Boring is where miracles are kept, Oin," I said, and we set a meeting for him to talk to Margaret about after-school tutoring and adult literacy nights. Time does its knitting. By fall, if you squinted, our family looked ordinary from the outside. Lila brought a pie to my apartment for no reason on a Tuesday. Vivian sent me a book she thought I'd like and wrote a note that didn't include instructions. Andrew and I argued about a baseball rule, and it was fun. One evening, I sat down to record a little video for the library's senior tech class, how to use the transit app, how to make a grocery list on your phone, how to silence notifications from an ex-friend without declaring war. I looked into the camera on my borrowed laptop and said, "If you're watching this, you're allowed to keep learning. You're allowed to want things. You're allowed to say no to being arranged." I closed the laptop with a solid click that tells you something has been said and doesn't need to be said again right away. Then I made dinner, a tomato sandwich thick with salt, because summer isn't forever, and carried it to my chair. I ate slowly. I listened to the building hum. I looked at the folder under the pear magnet, the one that told the truth and asked to be trusted. A few days later, at the Saturday market, I ran into a woman I recognized from the wedding, one of Vivian's museum friends. She hesitated, then stepped closer in the polite way people do when they aren't sure if you remember them. "I just wanted to say," she murmured, "that message your husband recorded, I still think about it. My mother lives with me and I manage her, if I'm honest. I think I'll try listening more." "Listening is cheaper than management," I said, "and better for the heart." She smiled and walked away with her bag of lemons. I watched her go and felt, for the first time in a long time, something like pride that didn't need an audience. On a cool evening in November, I found myself standing at the window in my robe, holding my mug like a small animal. Across the courtyard, my neighbor helped his teenage son load a laundry basket into the car. The boy looked tall and terrified. The father looked like he was praying not to say the wrong thing. I wanted to call out the window, let him make a few mistakes, let him find his own bus routes, pick him up when he asks, tell him he's allowed to be inconvenient and still be loved. I didn't yell. I just watched the boy climb into the passenger seat and look back at the apartment building like it was something he wished he could carry in his pocket and take with him. "Same," I said out loud to the empty room. "Same." When I sat down to write the little note I'd promised myself I would keep updating, my What I Want page, I added fresh ink under a tidy line. "Keep my door unlocked to the people who listen. Keep it locked to the plans that don't." Then I poured myself another cup of tea and picked up the book Robert had recommended, and when my phone buzzed with Lila's name at exactly the time it always does on Thursdays, I answered. "Tell me something good," I said. She told me something small and lovely about a bus driver who waited for a woman running with a stroller. I told her something small and lovely about the way the neighbor's dog fell asleep, with his nose pressed to the screen of the sliding door like he was sniffing dreams. We said goodnight. We said I love you. We did not make a plan for anything beyond breakfast. After I put the phone down, I thought about Jack and his fishing hat, and the sound of his voice in the wedding hall, and how a single recorded sentence can rearrange furniture in someone's heart. Then I turned off the lamp and let the room go quiet, because quiet isn't the absence of love. It's what love sounds like when it's not busy performing. And because you asked me to tell it like it happened, the next morning, I woke up, stretched, and did exactly what I'd planned before anyone else planned for me. I put on my walking shoes. I locked the door behind me. I stepped into the day that belonged to me. The months after Ireland stitched themselves into a slow, steady seam. Life rearranged around small certainties, library shifts, market Saturdays, Robert's awkward jokes about modern poetry, and the bigger things settled where they belonged. The folder under the pear magnet sat on the counter like a talisman. I opened it now and then, as if checking a sleeping child, and each time I found new things to add. A number for a handyman who would actually show up, the name of a neighbor who'd promised to feed my spider plant when I went away, the direct line to a GP who explained things plainly. One bright morning in late spring, I found a flyer tucked under my mailbox. Someone had hit the board with a hot glue gun and left it there like evidence. It was a fundraiser for the library, a promise of sandwiches and used paperbacks, and crucially, a new campaign to expand adult literacy classes. I felt the familiar stir of purpose. I called Margaret and said, "We need to take those sandwiches seriously." We organized volunteers like a small army of people who could read maps and make tea without judgment. Lila came by the first day with a thermos and a sheepish grin. Vivian sent a check with a note that didn't include an implementation plan. Andrew arrived unannounced, with his sleeves rolled up and a willingness to move chairs. He and Margaret argued about table placement like old friends. Lila worked the room in that old way, smiling, listening, making space for people. Only this time she didn't perform it. She slid into place like someone returning to a hometown with better manners. On a humid Tuesday, a woman in a blue cardigan came into the library clutching a small stack of envelopes. Her hands were knuckled with age and the polish on her nails had worn away. She looked around like a ship that had reached harbor and was unsure which pier to tie to. Margaret greeted her with the steady kindness of someone who knows which door to open first. "My name is Eleanor Hart," the woman said when I walked over with a basket of raffle tickets. "I'm here to sign up for the evening class." She laughed a little at herself. "And to see if someone will explain how to use that app you mentioned on Saturday." We signed her up. The class filled. At the end of the term, she hugged me and put a small grocery store bouquet in my hands. "Forgetting me to do something I was too afraid to try," she said. I put the flowers in a mason jar and pretended not to cry. There were nights when the old tension returned, like a shadow that remembers the shape of your shoulder. Lila would call, voice tight, something out of her day threatening to overseize in her stomach. One evening, Andrew called because his mother needed a minor surgery, and he felt the compulsion to plan everything in a spreadsheet. He asked pointed questions about Medicare codes and home care options. I listened. I told him about Miriam from the senior center and the home health agency that did not require signed assets. He listened back and apologized quietly for the time he'd been complacent. That apology landed differently now. not as a theatrical contrition, but as the small, honest sort. Sometimes Vivian would send a note or an article she thought I would like, and sometimes she wouldn't. The world is not a play where villains flip to heroes in an evening. It's a long series of nudges. Vivian nudged less. She sent fewer suggestions and more neutral pleasantries. Once she called to ask about one of Jack's old recipes, the one he twisted up with extra paprika, and then declared perfect. I told her the secret was clouds. Put the paprika in the air and let it dance. And she laughed like someone who had practiced that expression in mirrors. Cedar Ridge did not disappear. The way predatory things do, they lurk on the edge of conversation like moss. A cousin of mine, Doris, got a phone call from a care consultant who offered to assess her mother for a special placement. Doris called me in a fury. We went to her kitchen, looked at the papers, and read them together. She'd been offered a benign phrase, transfer for lifetime care. The line, the sentence, the ink. We examined each as if it might conceal a trap door. She did not sign. Instead, she came to the library's community legal clinic, and the lawyers helped them draw up a plan that left Doris and her mother in control. Doris baked a pie for us afterwards and called it Victory Pastry. I think we all did a small private dance. Lila's change was not perfect. She still had moments when fear nudged forward, and she asked a question like a person checking the lock on the wrong door. Once, when I postponed a doctor's appointment for no good reason, she called, voice tight, like cut string. "Please go," she said. "I know you think it's nothing. Please go so I can stop worrying." "I'll call Miriam," I said, because I had decided not to fight everyone for everything. "And I'll get checked." "Thank you," she breathed. The word carried a weight of both apology and relief. That winter, Lila's father, Jack's brother, whom we saw at family gatherings like a ghost of sibling rivalry, slid into town for a few days. We had a small dinner at my apartment. He listened to the wind sing through the eucalyptus outside like a man who had been given a long breath. He told me, in a voice that did not bother with theatrics, that when Jack died, he had felt the room shift in a way he'd never have predicted. "I missed the private parts of life until you played that recording, Hen," he said. "Jack, he told the truth about you in a way I didn't notice before. I wanted to say thank you. No one had to prod me. I just wanted to acknowledge it." I patted his hand and told him the truth, that it was easier to be loved when someone says it plainly. He nodded like a man who'd been given a map. I gave him leftover pie. He left with a proper hug. There were small public ripple effects, too. After the video I recorded for the library's tech class went up on the community page, a woman I'd never met emailed to say she had finally downloaded a transit app because the tutorial had been clear and kind. A neighbor overheard and mentioned it at the market. Word moved like a friendly current. Wins in our community were not always headline-grabbing, but they made a difference. The anniversary of Jack's death arrived like a thin gray day that asks for rituals. Lila came by with 3 paper cups and a thermos. We sat on my small balcony and drank coffee the way we used to, black, no sugar, and watched the sky decide if it wanted to rain. We did not speak for long. Then she reached across and took my hand. "You played his voice for everyone," she said softly. "I thought at first you were shaming me, but now I understand. It was a love note that didn't get to be private." "It was both," I said. "Sometimes love has a public address and private pockets. We need both." She laughed in a small, private way. "I'm trying to be brave without being efficient," she said. "I'm trying to let you be you." "You don't have to get it right on the first try," I told her. "That's the benefit of practice." Months slid further into seasons. Robert and I grew into a comfortable pattern. Lectures, slow walks, an occasional argument about the superiority of certain English novelists. He introduced me to a friend who ran a small poetry reading. We went some Friday nights, and I found that listening to strangers read made the world seem bigger and smaller at once. One spring afternoon, a woman from the community legal clinic called and said they'd been asked to look over a set of contracts from a company that had a pattern suspiciously like Cedar Ridge. The firm had been calling people who'd recently lost spouses. The legal team wanted to build a public awareness plan. "Would you be willing to speak?" the woman asked. "Just to tell your story, to be a voice that says, 'Ask questions.'" I agreed, because my life felt oddly tied to that work. I had stood inside the kind of pressure I now recognized as institutional habit. I'd been the person who was almost moved without consent, and I could help others not be moved. The forum was smaller than a ballroom, and more honest for it. They set chairs in rows, and one microphone at the front, and a pitcher of water. I sat in the second row and watched a woman from the legal clinic explain, in a voice the color of steady wood, how to spot a sales tactic dressed as compassion. Then they invited me to the microphone. I told the story plainly: the wedding hall hush, the letter tucked into my purse, the folder with public records. I told them about Margaret's patients, about Miriam from the senior center, about how small practical acts had saved me from making a decision I would have regretted. I warned them about neat sentences like "transfer for lifetime care," because they often hide the real cost. I urged them to ask for second opinions, to contact legal aid before signing, to call a friend who will sit with them while the forms are explained. At the end, a woman in the fifth row raised her hand. She had the same tiny knuckled hands I'd seen earlier at the library. She leaned forward and said, "I thought I didn't deserve a fight. Thank you for telling me I do." The applause wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. Afterward, people came up and pressed their hands to mine like talismans. A reporter from a local paper asked for a few quotes, and by the morning the story was up. Not a headline war, just a steady piece about the work of keeping elders in charge of their lives. That spring, Lila and Andrew hosted a small gathering for a local nonprofit. Vivian appeared with a tray of canapes and an expression that worried less about optics and more about whether the hummus was too dry. She found me near the back, by the bookshelves, and slid into the last empty bar stool like a person who'd decided to see a situation through. "Eleanor," she said, I wanted to say thank you for how you handled things, for allowing me to reconsider." "You didn't have to reconsider on my account," I said. "You could have reconsidered because you changed your mind." "I did change my mind," she said, "and I wanted to learn from you about listening. People tell me they felt heard by you. I liked that." Her smile trembled like a bird. We spent a few minutes talking about nothing weighty: the garden at the community center, a local author whose event she'd been meaning to attend, and it felt honest because it sat like a small stone on a table, not a monument. The years went on with summers that hummed and winters that made us reach for different sweaters. Lila's career shaped and reshaped. She moved from brand storytelling to broader nonprofit work. She found that in charities, language could be used for good more often than not. Andrew and Vivian found a new rhythm of hospitality that included more listening and fewer instructions. My friendships deepened, Margaret's laugh still being my favorite public instrument, Robert's thoughtful pauses becoming something I welcomed. When I look back, and I do often, not like a judge but like someone dusting a shelf, I see that the wedge of that terrible evening opened something, a chance to redraw maps with consent instead of compulsion. Jack's letter was the spark. My refusal to be arranged without my consent was the fuel. Lila's willingness to learn was the kindling. And the small people, the librarians, the neighbors, the woman who signed up for evening class, or the weather that helped new growth happen. There are still hard days. You can't keep a life soft at all times. Sometimes it gets brittle in the weather. Once I came home from a routine checkup with a doctor's note that said a procedure may be necessary. For a week, the old fear of being offloaded like a package wrapped in legalese returned. Lila sat with me in the clinic lobby and held my hand while the receptionist typed. She didn't plan my life. She watched the doors. She called my sister to make a casserole, and then she texted a song that made us both smile. In the end, the procedure was minor. My recovery was long because I prefer tea to stirrups. Lila brought soup, and Andrew learned to fold fitted sheets properly. Vivian learned to ask how stitches felt. We learned to stick around. On a late autumn afternoon, I sat on a bench in the small park by the library and watched leaves move like currency in the wind. Robert walked over with 2 cups of coffee and his now customary grin. He sat and handed me one. "You know," he said, "I once thought my life would be a pile of unread drafts. Then I met you and discovered that drafts are mostly the good parts. They let you start again." "You're being sentimental," I said. He shrugged and looked at the water. "I'm being honest," I smiled. "Thank you for being my favorite draft." He laughed. Then he touched my hand, light, exact, and said, "You did not vanish. You kept your life." "No," I said, looking at the pile of leaves. "I did not." That evening, when Lila called, she told me that a woman she met through work had been recommended Cedar Ridge by a well-meaning sister-in-law. I sat with the phone. Lila's voice softened with protective instinct, but this time it carried a new weight, one of practiced patience. "We already have a plan," I said. "Let's get legal eyes on the paperwork. Call Margaret if you want, though I suspect she'll send a pie as well." We both laughed. "Deal," she said. "And Mom?" "Yes." "Thank you for letting me be part of the solution, even if I did bring brochures first." "You're welcome," I said. "Just don't bring them next time until we both agree." She promised. Some nights, I still take out Jack's letter and read it quietly, not to be soothed, but to remember the voice that pushed me toward my own backbone. I put it back in its sleeve and slide it into the folder, as if tucking a small, patient animal into bed. When people ask me now, often because human beings enjoy asking each other how they survived things, I tell them something that I didn't know at first, that standing up for your right to make your own choices is not the same as refusing help. It's the practice of asking for help in a way that preserves your dignity. It's the work of making boundaries tender and not brittle. It's the act of loving someone enough to let them be inconvenient sometimes, because that is where the real conversations live. There are letters and recordings and folders. There are trips to Ireland and dinners that include too many jokes. There are mornings when I still wake to a quiet that brings with it the memory of how fragile life can be. And there are mornings like today, where the light is a balm, and I make coffee and put sugar in it for the exact one person who likes it that way. If you're listening to this story, please know it's okay to put your foot down, and it's okay to take a breath and say, "Help me." It's okay to be both firm and open. It's okay to let the people you love fail and grow and come back. I keep the folder not because I need a weapon, but because I like the shape of my life when it's written down. Clear, considered, and mine. When I close the kitchen drawer at night and the house settles, there is a particular hush that is not absence, but presence. It's what remains when everyone who matters knows how to show up, sometimes clumsy, sometimes late, sometimes perfectly, always present. The truth is simple. The people in my life are complicated, and so am I. We survive not because we are flawless, but because we keep choosing each other in ways that honor the person and not the role. A neighbor walks his dog past my window. The boy with the laundry basket waves. My phone buzzes with Lila's name in the familiar place. I answer it and listen to her tell me, in small, jubilant detail, that she won a small victory at work. A grant secured for a program that teaches kids to write letters to elders in the nursing home she used to recommend. I laugh because it's perfect. Kids who write letters to elders who remember stamps. When I hang up, I stand and go to the window, the same window where I watched an orange cat earlier in my life and decided to keep my keys. I look at the street, at the world that keeps doing what it does, changing. Messy, lovely. I put on my coat and step outside because there are errands to run, postcards to mail, a new library chair to pick up, and a pie to borrow from a friend who insists it's safer to share than to keep. I walk with the steady, small joy of someone who knows the difference between being managed and living. I move through the day that belongs to me, in the body I choose to keep. The folder sits at home, under the pear magnet, faithful and waiting, like a friend that knows how to fold itself into whatever we need most. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If it touched you, please remember to subscribe to the channel and support it with a like. It truly helps these stories reach more people. I'd also love to know, from what city are you watching and listening today? Share it in the comments below. Until next time, see you in the next story. I believed myself.